So I'm Hiram Fitzgerald, and I'm from Michigan State University, and I've been working with Paul Golding for the last 5 or 6 years around an issue related to boys and their development. And the issue is, to what extent are boys at risk for developmental life course pathways that will lead them to high rates of aggressive behavior and, in an extreme, violent behavior. This particular conference, we were focused on the violent side, and so we're trying to look at all the kinds of science components that might contribute to the development of boys' risk for violence. And that includes genetic aspects, epigenetic aspects. We're looking at brain structures and functions and regulatory systems, and also looking at what happens in the real world of their lives that contribute to all this, which means their parenting structures and their neighborhoods and all those things. Because we know that all those factors play a role in everybody's development as a human being, but we're especially interested in boys and this sense that they have a risky road to go in order to, that leads them to more aggression and violent behavior, and we want to try to understand that. So for the past 52 years, actually about 54 years, counting my graduate school, I've been studying issues related to this, primarily with families that have infants and toddlers, 0 to 5 age children, in a variety of different contexts. Currently, much of my time is spent with a lot of colleagues at the University of Colorado, Denver, and Johns Hopkins University, the Brazelton Institute, and Michigan State University around American Indian families, especially reservation-based, with 0 to 5 age children. So Head Start programs, early Head Start programs, and their lived experiences. I also study families that have alcohol use disorders, but again, in the context of what impact does that have on infants, toddlers, and preschool age children. And I also am connected with a major effort in West Australia, in 2 cities, working with colleagues there, and I'm actually on Monday giving a talk at another conference on that work. And it's an effort to try to inform the 5 segments of their system of care in 2 cities a little bit north of Perth about infant mental health, relationship-based issues involving mothers and their babies and fathers and their babies and young children. And it has to do with, if a family comes into a pediatrician or a general practitioner, is that general practitioner aware of the kinds of cues that mothers or fathers might give in the context of the visit to the general practitioner? What that would lead the general practitioner to think, I think that this mother is not reacting to her baby in a really sort of normative way. She doesn't make eye contact. She seems to be distracted. So if they're aware of those sort of cues, will they then refer that parent and baby to another part of the system of care that would deal with relationship issues, not general health issues, but infant mental health issues. So that's the goal of that project, is to inform people that work in each of the 5 segments of their system of care about those signs, about family interactions and relationship issues, so that they increase the referral systems, referrals, and across those systems, and families get better care. So it's a long-term project. We just finished the first 18 months of it, and So far, that's going well. So everything I do in research, everything I do connected to other institutions are around issues related to babies, toddlers, and preschool-age kids and their lived experience. Yeah, the work I do with fathers is really to bring fathers back into the family in ways that we know now that fathers seem to play two key roles in child development in general. One is cognitive development. Families where fathers are present tend to have children, boys and girls, who do better in cognitive skill developments, which not only just in how well they perform in school, but mathematical learning and concepts around quantitative ideas and things like that. So that's one key role they seem to play. We're not quite sure how that occurs, but the evidence sure suggests it. The second way is probably the most important of them, and that is that fathers seem to play a very critical role in children, especially boys, learning how to control their behavior. And they do it in ways that are different than the way that mothers do. So mothers and many teachers in preschools and that level, when a situation arises, will generally approach that situation by trying to get the child to understand how that other child may be feeling about being hit and things like that. And so there's this sort of trying to understand your emotions and the emotions of another person with respect. Fathers are much more likely to say, "Stop that." That's not appropriate behavior. So there's not the same sense that we need to understand the emotional understandings, but we need to understand that that's inappropriate behavior and you shouldn't do it. So that the child begins to internalize notions of self-control behaviorally, and that is accompanied by a mother or a teacher in a similar situation, helping the child to understand the emotional aspects of it. So there's both emotional and behavioral controls, and it seems that mothers and fathers tend to do that differently. So we know in father-absent families, boys especially have a lot of behavioral control problems, and that persists well into childhood and further. So we have both. We know that happens when fathers are not around, and we know it doesn't happen so much when fathers are around. So that's another key role that fathers play in family life. So we got to get them back into the family. Yeah, there are lots of programs underway to try to get fathers back into it. And we can have programs and programs and programs and efforts, but it's a societal problem. It's not a problem that solely is on the basis of human science researchers. Governments need to begin to change policies and programs and to examine the barriers that they may construct within social policies that move fathers away from families as opposed to bringing them back into families. So it really is going to take a complete societal effort in order to reconnect fathers back into their families. In the 1950s, a family representation on television, for example, was father, mother, and kids. There were no other kinds of representations of the family then, because most families were like that. Second World War, enormous loss of men. When they came back to at least our country, there's a tremendous pressure in the kinds of music that developed, the kinds of social ideas of family life and everything that were to bring young men and women together and produce babies, because we lost a lot of people in the war. So the kinds of structures in society then sort of had this idealized family, headed by a father, with a mother who tended to stay home. Well, that model of family life changed over time. As women became more educated, women became more involved with the workforce, etc. You've got to remember that during the Second World War, those factories building tanks, airplanes, were women. They were working then. So they now retreat. We have this personification of that in Rosie the Riveter, so from that era. So now they're back in the family, and now change occurs through the 60s and 70s, and fathers began to sort of drift away from their responsibilities, and for a wide variety of reasons, I guess. But now we have to bring them back in. It is more homogeneous, but that's changing. Immigration is changing. Yeah, I have a lot of colleagues in Finland and Norway, not so much Sweden, but that's changing a little bit, and they're having some societal problems around that. But what they have that we don't have in this country is they have a countrywide system of family support that we don't have in this country. But you have to remember, Finland has about 7 million people. Michigan has 9 million people. The United States has 300 million people. So for Finland to organize a countrywide system built on a 50% contribution of your tax base, which they choose to do because it enhances the quality of life for everybody, is different, is easier maybe to accomplish than it is for the United States to do it. It's easier for Michigan as a state to develop programs and allocation of resources within their state than it is for the United States government to do it for 300 million people. So, because we have not had that same shared sense of we do this for all Finns based on the homogeneity of that society, but that's changing because there are now immigrants going into all the Scandinavian countries, and the diversification of their populations go, but I don't think it'll change their system of how they operate because it's too ingrained over the years. So, but you know, each country is different. Each country has a sense of what is government's role with respect to getting my money. And our country is a little different than their countries in that regard through taxation. Yeah, alcoholism, suicide, high rate of fathers not being around, a high rate of adolescent males in the juvenile justice system, etc., prison. Well, what we did to that culture is probably it's probably the cause of all that. You know, you take 100,000 children from their families and stick them in boarding schools. You don't allow them to braid their hair. You don't allow them to wear their regalia. You don't allow them to speak their language. You don't allow them to have contact with their family except for once a year. No wonder they're screwed up, because all the things that would give them an identity and a rootedness in their culture was taken away from them. And given, again, this concept of male vulnerability, the males were probably more affected by that because in those things we just mentioned, alcoholism, suicide, it's more males than it is females. American Indian women are, like most women, are more resilient to certain kinds of stresses because they have to reproduce. And so we need to have them around more than we need to have the boys around, unfortunately. But there's a lot of data that says even in fetal development, girl fetuses are not as affected as boy fetuses by certain kinds of stress that the mother experiences during pregnancy. Again, because we need to have them to be more viable in order to continue to reproduce the species. And that probably goes back hundreds of thousand years of our species developing and organizing on the planet, because there was a time when lifespan was 30 years or less. If you were 30 years old 200,000 years ago, you were probably an old person. So